not issues they could debate during those times. So the army's own self-perception and then the roles it kept on assigning to itself initially was all welcomed, but after a while people had a reaction. And what I want to do is talk about the dominant narratives. I can't talk about everything, but for the men, I felt there were differences in men's perception of the military and the women's perception of the military. For the men, I think fundamentally the power relations, the equation in power relations was basically driving what they felt. And so many of the men would say, oh, the army has raped our women. So the rape narrative, it was there before also. The army in the past there would be rumors that the Taliban were going around raping women, but actually, you know, the Taliban were not, but they were stupid enough, and the Indian RAW, the Indian intelligence agency, because Pakistan and India are sort of historically been enemies, so they would say RAW has infiltrated the Taliban and RAW people are raping women in Swat. These would be the rumors that would go around. And then there were other rumors that would say the army, Pakistani army men go inside houses to look for the Taliban and they rape women. And there would be other rumors of just like men coming in, and because many of the men had sort of run away, were fleeing, they would say women are putting men's footwear outside the door to indicate that there are men inside the house, and so potential rapists would stay away. So the rumors of rape, we actually, when we went there, we couldn't, I asked doctors about the rapes and if they had sort of received, treated anyone. We couldn't, it would always be, but women in the other village said there was a rape in that, not in our village. So there must have been rapes, but perhaps the incidence was not as high as the rumors would indicate, because also there was the purpose of fear, instilling fear. So the male narratives, the men's narratives were constantly about the women being raped by the army, and therefore their resentment. And they said what the army does is they get all the men out to sit in a playground or some open area outside so they can go in and search the houses for Taliban men who they are looking for. So when they go in, they harass the women or they rape the women because the men are sitting outside and the men feel emasculated. So those were sort of, that is what was coming through. Of course, the men, and with time they felt like Taliban need to leave, the military needs to leave. Why is the military present? They hated both the Taliban as well as the military. And questioned why it needed to be there now that there is peace and police, a lot of, there are more inductions in the police force, and now the army really doesn't need to be there. For the women, they had mixed views about, men also had mixed views, but for women, the views from women were far more pronounced. Most of the women kept saying the army should not leave because they felt the Taliban will come back. And they feared the Taliban more than the military because they felt the Taliban, with their strict imposition of parda, the curbs on women, their schooling, their access, they were banned from going to the markets to shop for anything, or from accessing doctors if the child was ill, or when there were no men, they could not go to buy food outside. So, you know, all of that trauma left them wanting the army to be there. So many of the women kept saying, yes, we know that the real peace is not there, because if there was real peace, we wouldn't need the army. But we don't want the Taliban. And so the army must stay on in order to, keep the Taliban away from us. So because women's experience of the Taliban was far worse than that of the men. One of the women told us that we sleep because of the army. We are able to sleep in peace. Your democracy stood by and watched us get slaughtered. So the reference was that, you talk about, like, when we condemn militarization with our lens, They said, but you know, the democratic government out there, the parliament and so on, they were debating these issues. They watched us getting slaughtered. It was the army that came in and saved us, and it's because of the army that we are able to sleep today. Another woman said, yeah, the men complain about the checkposts and the harassment and the traffic jams, but I tell them, would you rather be in a traffic jam or be at your son's funeral? So these were kind of the practical responses. On the other hand, the men said, why are there these checkposts? They think the Taliban are going to come on the road. Why can't they cross through the fields and so on? They're not going to come and be checked out. So it's stupid to have these checkposts, they would say. So they were very clearly very different ways of looking at the army's presence. And of course, we went in with our sort of preconceived notion of everyone doesn't want the army, and many women were critical, but at the same time, they told us, look, your democracy stood by. It didn't do anything for us. So I also wanted to, some women, like a lawyer, who said, you know, it was a special time. Swat was a conflict zone, and we needed the military. So, you know, and in any case, she said, not just the Taliban, but now people are terrorists. They don't need to come to you in the form of their long hair and a long beard. There are Taliban. The mentality is there among ordinary people as well, so far as women's visibility is concerned. So we need, because the army was encouraging them to go to work, building hostels where they could stay, so on and so forth. So they thought the military is doing a good thing for women's rights. And that's where sort of the dilemmas are of militarization, women security. Also, some women, I just thought this is aside like a footnote, some women also gained from militarization and the presence of the military. One woman who was a local councillor, local government representative in the past, said she goes and, you know, tells the military seemed to trust her. She had a relationship, and I call these kind of women the conflict entrepreneurs. She would go and say, okay, I'm giving you my personal guarantee. This person you have picked up, so-and-so son, whatever, is not a Talib. You know, please release him. She would give the guarantee. The army would release that boy or young man on her guarantee. She in return would receive money from the families. She became quite rich in the process, but she said, well, lawyers charge a fee and they plead their cases, so I go in and I give my guarantee and the army trusts me, so if I charge a fee, what's wrong with that? So there were those narratives as well that I thought were very interesting, and she was sort of really gung-ho about things and would be running around, rushing from here to there, talking to the police, talking to the military men, coming to Islamabad, so on and so forth. Also, she was helping the military, giving them information, so-and-so is hidden over there, go find him there, or so on. So it's not all a unilinear narrative. But for women, I mean, the physical security and the psychological security, they also feared for their men, just like the men would fear for the women in terms of rape for women. They said every time the man, you know, the son, father, whoever goes out, we worry because we don't know if there will be a bomb blast outside or not, or if the military will pick him up, or one woman said she had two sons, one had a beard and one was clean shaven. One was picked by the Pakistan army and interrogated, the other one was picked up by the Taliban and interrogated. So she said, you know, initially I didn't even know where to go and go to the police and say, who's picked up my sons? So those kinds of fears were also very much there. It wasn't sort of a straightforward, we want the army. Yes, we want it, but we also fear what they may be doing. And the detention centers were sort of, you know, there were detention centers in different areas which the army felt were justified, but that the people really feared, and that's where the conflict entrepreneurs also come in. The women, of course, on rape, the women felt there weren't so many rapes, but they said, look, there's the romance of the uniform, they're young girls, they like these men who represent power and, you know, liberation, and so they run away with these young men, and Swati girls are really supposed to be very pretty, and the army, the young officers or soldiers would also fall in love, and, you know, so there was, so how the women interpreted that was, they were eloping, running away. The men said, the army men are abducting and kidnapping and raping. So there are two different interpretations of rape. And the women, of course, were very articulate. They said, look, some of them felt the Taliban and the army are one. They said if they were not one, why did all the leaders escape? Why were the ordinary Taliban caught, but the big leaders, Fazlullah and so on, were allowed to escape to Afghanistan? So they said both are one, really, so far as we are concerned. They have just orchestrated this whole thing. We don't understand why this was done, but you know. So those were sort of the main, and of course in the process I hope you understand the internal contradictions of insecurity and peace. How do you get peace, and how do you, if it's insecurity, then you need more and more military and military presence. And so I just wanted to sort of sum it up and talk about the implications of conflict and militarization, how the two feed into each other, and sort of in the Pakistan context, how the military has redefined the enemy. In the past, the military was there to defend the borders and the frontiers of the country, and the main enemy was identified as India. But sometime in 2011 or 12, actually formally the military has something called the Green Book, and over there it said the enemy is within. So instead of an outside enemy that the military needed to fight on the borders, now the military needed to be inside, looking inwards at the enemy. So the enemy is within, and then there were various laws to provide legal cover for army actions. So that were actually interestingly applied retroactively from 2007 onwards, so that the military will not be held responsible for the killings and so on, because it said the military was there in aid of civilian power. Okay, I'm almost done. So the point is, terrorism, you know, in my mind, then spurs internal policing, changes the physical landscape of a place, because there are more and more military or checkposts or police checkposts. You need more and more people in the police. The main city in Swat, Mingora, now has 7,000 policemen. In the past, it had only a few hundred. The whole district has far more policemen, 12,000 today, whereas in the past there were 1,500 or 2,000. So there's increased policing. Of course, there's increased military presence, but that fear of terrorism, of what it may do, and of course the administrative setup changes, because as civilian governments and governance arrangements collapse, the army comes in as the big protector and rescuer. So that aspect, and then there's the prison system, but then the detention centers take over. And you have extrajudicial deaths and extrajudicial killings, which cannot take place that easily inside the prison system. And given I didn't talk about the status of Swat, but it is something called provincially administered tribal area, so people have limited rights of appeal to the courts and so on. Also the domination of private security over public order, so, people's security becomes more and more privatized. I will not go into the changed relationship with Islam as the Taliban sort of challenge, because in the past the military and Pakistan's, what we used to be fed on and brought up on was Islamic ideology. That is finally being challenged, because the Taliban accused the military of siding with the United States and the forces, US forces, NATO forces everywhere in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. So they're not physically present in Pakistan, but they say, look, these are the army is fighting an anti-Islam war. So now in the past, the army had sort of monopoly over Islam and would justify anything. Now the army is, like some of the political parties' leaders said, even if a dog is hit by a drone and, dies, I will call it a shaheed, a martyr. But the army people who are dying in this war, they're not martyrs. Whereas the army has come up with martyr packages, shaheed packages for policemen who were killed for army. Otherwise, you will not have people willing to go and die. So they are given 3 million rupees if you die. There's a complex compensation policy. I will not get into that. But, overall, there is a changed relationship over, who is going to rule and how that rule is going to take place and on whose terms. I will stop here. Thank you for your patience.